FairTax is coming, don't stand in the way. FairTax is coming across the USA. FairTax is coming, clean up this mess. We got to get rid of the IRS. Hey, hey! Hey, hey!
Hello and welcome once again to FairTax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are
The
FairTax
FairTax
guys
guys.
on a mission to get rid of the income tax, to exterminate the Internal Revenue Service, and replace all that with a simple, easy, fair consumption tax that is called the FairTax.
We have talked quite a bit about the inefficiencies of the current tax system and what the FairTax is. We used our Jeff Foxworthy style of presenting some of the FairTax points. And today we are on location at the National Parachute Testing Center with Mr. Bob Mathews, who runs this place. And guess what they do here?
They jump out of airplanes.
Yeah, they do.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun.
And Mr. Paxton is a fan of this, whereas I prefer to use an airplane as a conveyance towards a vacation, and that's it. But anyways, Bob Mathews is a longtime FairTax advocate. He is our community coordinator here in Dunellen, does presentations for us, and he has several businesses. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mr. Mathews, and I'm just going to stand back and take some pictures. All right?
All right, but first let's get everybody our contact address. If you've got comments about the program, questions about the FairTax, you may send them, email them to the fairtaxguys@gmail.com. If you'd like an audio recording of this program, this will be number 7. We can send you back a link where you can download that.
Okay, let's get to it.
And we are speaking today with Mr. Bob Mathews in Dunellen, Florida. Bob, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Bob. I really appreciate it, and I think it's a very important subject, fair tax, and we got to do whatever we can to get it in.
Okay, well, the subject at hand today is going to be what life is like for a businessman, preferably a small businessman under the tax code, and so of course you are well qualified to talk about business. You've been owning and running businesses for the most part of your life. Just go ahead and touch a little bit on your career as a businessman and what you're up to these days.
Well, I'd be happy. First off, I must say that I'm probably the last guy in this room that should want the fair tax. I'm medically retired from the military, and I pay no taxes on my retirement, and if I didn't work at any other thing, I'd have no tax liability whatsoever. However, whenever I get involved with a company, and I've been in several, I find myself spending almost as much time trying to keep up with the taxes, avoid the taxes, pay the taxes, as I do running the business. It's, in some cases, it's more than the time I spend running the business.
Okay, now a lot of people understand, of course, first thing I want to get into with you is, again, what life is like under the current tax code for the businessman. Now, most folks, when they think about how taxes affect businesses, they realize that they have to keep records, they have to fill out forms, they have to deal with withholding, calculating that from their employees' paychecks and getting all that done. I'm interested in what else is out there that might not be on a lot of people's radar that still takes time, effort, and resources away from your business, but you've got to do it to stay on the good side of the IRS.
Well, one of the companies that I operate, National Parachute Test Center, does a fair amount of retail and wholesale sales of parachute equipment. Most of this equipment is government surplus, so it's very difficult to calculate the cost of goods sold. It's easy to know how much you paid for the parachute, but by the time you crank in the shipping and all the documentation you had to do to get that sale through a government auction, keep track of all those prices to fairly come up with what your dollar value in that piece of equipment is compared to what you get back. We spend a lot of time on that, a lot of time. Another thing that's strange and it's recent is we do a lot of work with PayPal. We get paid by them. Many of our sales are international. So PayPal sends us a list of what they paid, but coordinating that with what was sold, and the really bad part is PayPal sends a W-2 to the government giving them the total amount of money we got in, which now the government feels is our gross income. But we now have to take all those expenses out. And it's really a burden. I spend probably a full month of the year just trying to keep these things lined up.
Okay, in your experience, just a rough estimation, considering all the man hours that you and any of your employees and contractors put into running your business, how many of those man hours are spent dealing simply with tax issues as opposed to doing things that help your business and help your customers?
We've got to be anywhere from 15 to 20% of the hours we spend here between my wife and I, and then that doesn't account the accountants, because in two of the businesses we do all the work, prepare the information, and then send it off to the accountant, who spends some time on it and then charges me $800 to file. So at the end of the day, I'm spending much more time than you really want to do on this, much more time.
Oh, mercy, I bet. You know, a lot of people think that the only thing the tax system costs you is the tax liability itself, but your compliance costs are through the roof, are they not?
Absolutely. We're spending, right now I've got a pile on my desk where we were in a commodity market for a while, and we purchased commodities, sold them and bought them and sold them. The end result was, after about 3 years, I pulled out of it. We lost some money, not an awful lot, but we lost some money. Unbeknownst to me, this commodity company was sending every one of my sales, every time I sold a silver bar or a gold bar, to the federal government. But they never put down any of the purchases. So all of a sudden I end up with a $26,000 tax liability.
Wow.
Yes.
And you had no idea that was coming?
No, none whatsoever. So now I have to go back through all the records over the 5 years we were doing this and match up a purchase with a sale and figure out the taxes all over again for those years. And there, you can see on that desk over there, there's a stack of stuff that we've been going on whenever I get time. I can't do it all day, every day.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've all heard about that famous case several years ago where GE, huge international corporation, paid no taxes. There was a big hue and cry about that. Of course, what a lot of things you don't hear about is how much GE spent on accountants and lawyers to get there. But I understand that you're familiar with a similar case, albeit on a smaller scale, that didn't make the national news, concerning an airport in New Jersey. Tell us about that.
Yes, Bob. Back in the mid-'80s, I was a small investor with a couple of friends of mine in purchasing the Burlington County Airport in southern New Jersey. We redesignated it the South Jersey Regional Airport and got the federal government to declare it a reliever airport for Philadelphia, making it eligible for federal funds. It was a small 112-acre airport, and my partners up there started purchasing additional property with the help of the government around it, expanding areas, putting in retention ponds, just developing it so that the runway could be expanded and take the private flights out of Philadelphia and land them right at our airport, which is only 20 miles away, relieving Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah.
That was the whole purpose. And I had nothing to do with it, simply a silent investor, until my partner was killed in '99 in an airplane accident. And I went up there and I talked to his widow, and she said she'd sell the airport. And I thought that was wonderful. I waited to get my check for my investment, and she couldn't sell the airport. The town was all over her. The township was making it difficult. End result, I agreed to go up and run the airport, put the wheels back in the cart, and see if we couldn't get this thing in saleable condition. And I managed it for 4 years. We took in about $800,000 a year, a little more the last couple years. And, you know, that looks like pretty good revenue. But it was very expensive operating up there. There were horrendous costs in New Jersey. Plus, we were plowing all this money back into the airport. And we were spending about $30,000 a year in accountants and lawyers to define for the federal government that this $800,000 that came in had no profit in it. We never took a dime to the bank. Nobody ever bought a beer off the money we made on that airport.
Wow.
It all went back into it. And fortunately, at the end of the 4 years, we did sell it to the state, and we got our money. And we're about to go home when we received a letter from the FAA asking us to send them a check for all the money. Because they invested in the airport, they felt the money was theirs.
Oh, mercy.
Well, we fought that with the help of a couple of representatives here, John Micah in Florida, and we put that to bed. Obviously, we'd owned the airport, the money was ours, and it wasn't a question. But to spend $120,000 over 4 years to tell the government we don't owe them anything, that's atrocious. There does not make any sense at all. It's hugely burdensome.
And that's all because of the way the current tax code is.
Absolutely, sir. It's just depreciation schedules. I mean, if we pour asphalt, it's 21 years. If you put up a building, it's 40 years. Everything has got a different scale. Everything is tracked differently. If you start something this month, you got to track it from this month till 20 years from now. If you did something 6 months ago, you're tracking that on a separate item. It's just the paperwork is enormous. I mean, our tax filings were literally 5 pounds of paper.
Mercy. And if another airport in another part of the country goes to their representatives and they are successfully lobby for a change in some of this, something that happens, thousands of miles away that could go into the tax code, you wouldn't even know about it, but it would still affect you.
Oh, yes. No, the tax code is Byzantine. There's, what are we at, 72,000 pages with, findings, and nobody can keep track of it, and the IRS doesn't know. I mean, they don't.
Yeah, I seen something the other day that they were only going to be able to answer about half of the calls that they expect to get from people that are confused on their taxes. The call volume they expected was in the millions. It's just way too complicated. Now getting away from these extreme cases like GE and in your experience running and owning businesses, just typically ballpark figure, what percentage of your compliance costs, how do your compliance costs compare to your actual tax liability?
Well, I have one company, Aerobotics. It is developing a product for the government. We've been working on it for 6 years, and that 6 years we've not made a profit. But my compliance costs are about 2 to 3 weeks working on the paperwork every year, getting it to the accountant and paying the accountant. So, I'm saying we're probably spending $3,000 to $5,000 in just telling the government again that we don't make any money.
So,
on the other company I have, National Parachute Test Center, we have to track the used equipment that we sell, the foreign sales from U.S. sales, trying to develop costs of goods. Again, we spend another 2 or 3 weeks, maybe more, every year trying to pull this together in some form so that the government can see that this is what we made, this is what we pay taxes on. And quite frankly, we're spending at least as much on giving them the information as we are on giving them the money.
Now, the number I've heard floating around in general is that it costs a small business roughly 7 times as much in compliance costs as it is in actual tax liability. You think that's accurate?
Oh, very much. I would say so. It certainly 5 times, but 7's not unreasonable.
Okay. Now, another issue with the current tax code that the Joe man on the street is probably not aware of and doesn't think much about, but is of a huge importance to business people, is how that the current tax code puts U.S. businesses at a disadvantage in the world market. You mentioned a minute ago selling to a lot of international customers. What kind of problems do you get to in that regard, and how would it help your business if you were able to compete on a level playing field?
Well, we look at the FairTax as being the answer here. Right now, complying with cost of goods sales, what it cost me to buy the item in the first place, all the shipping, transportation, the fees that are charged by PayPal and other people, the actual physical shipping charges, those all fall into different categories under the IRS, and you got to track them all, and it's insane. If we just had a simple sales tax, if I sold it to you and charge you 23%, and that would be the end of it, and then I turn around and sell one overseas, I don't have to collect that sales tax when it goes overseas. So that gives me a great advantage.
Yeah, but under the current system, all the costs of the tax system that we've got now, all those compliance costs and that has to be embedded into the prices that you charge on the world market. And a lot of international companies, a lot of other nations reimburse their manufacturers for what they have their VAT tax over there. So their goods come to market without a tax component in the price. Yours come to market with a tax component in the price. How much of a problem is that?
Well, that is the problem. The first thing you're going to see is that if we could go to just a flat tax, FairTax, instead of its income tax that is spread over various components of the product, it would be much cheaper for me to sell it. It would be cheaper because I wouldn't spend so much time tracking things. Secondly, if it was sold internationally, I wouldn't have any taxes, so we would be much below the market value in the rest of the world. And it would make it so much easier. It would also be attractive to build more product. There's a couple of companies out there that produce product, one in South Africa, a couple of others doing most of their stuff in Sri Lanka, and some down in Central America where they build their parachutes, and they're much cheaper. And we can't build them up here. We just cannot compete with that market. But if we were able to take the embedded tax out, then we'd be much more attractive. And we would find more people coming to this country to build product because it would be less expensive than building it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And you probably can't give me an exact answer here, but just estimate how much of a sales increase do you think your business would see if you were able to do that? If the fair tax were here and you did not have to charge more because you're dealing with this currently complex tax system?
It would be between 30%, maybe as high as 40% more. And then again, see, that's revenue that would come to the country because the sales tax that we would pay on these products, of course, revert to the federal government. And tracking sales tax is no problem. My wife says to me at the end of the quarter, what do we owe in sales tax? And I pull up and see how much I sold in Florida and how much I sold outside. I give her three numbers: gross sales, taxable sales, and 6% of taxable sales. It doesn't take me 15 minutes.
Yeah, and if you had a 40% increase in your business, you would obviously have to hire more people, more jobs for Americans. They would pay more taxes to the government. It's a win-win for everybody.
Oh, it is. I mean, then we'd make an expansion on the airport system here. I want to put a classroom and another office on the other side of the hangar. You know, that's going to be about $100,000 to put in there. But right now in this economy, nobody's looking at spending $100,000 to improve business.
Now, you know there are plenty of problems with the tax code. Besides the time, the effort, and the cost it takes to go ahead and comply with that for small businesses to deal with. Now, one other problem is that it is incredibly error-prone. It is incredibly fraud-prone. I mean, identity thieves have a field day, impersonating other people and getting their tax refunds. I hear you've had a little personal experience with that.
Yes, my personal tax return. I'm just checking the end of the month, I look and see what went into the bank and what came out of the bank, and I'm noticing my Social Security's down about $175 this month. So I didn't think much. I thought maybe it was a Medicare charge or I was overpaid at some time. I wasn't really too worried. And the next month, I'm down under $175, exact same amount. And the next month, the third month, I got on the phone, tried to call the IRS. Well, you know how that goes. They got a phone tree there that goes to Nome, Alaska. There is no way in heck you can catch anybody.
Amen.
So I finally broke down and I went to the Social Security office in town. I got an appointment and I went in there and I sat down. It still took me 2.5 hours to wait to see him. I will say that the woman I met was very nice. She was delightful once I got in there. And she came through and she said, well, this is what you're getting and this is your gross Social Security. And I said, well, what's this 175? And she said, well, let me look that up. I don't recognize the code. So she comes back and she says, well, that's a tax withholding from the IRS. I said, a tax withholding? She says, yes, they can take 15% of your Social Security if you owe them taxes. I said, well, ma'am, I don't owe them any taxes. She says, take it up with them. Uh-oh. So we went the next day to the IRS office. Well, you cannot make an appointment. It's first come, first served. The man said, get here early in the morning before we open. And I was there along with 6 or 8 other people. And there were 3 folks in there. And again, we sat for a few hours. I went in. Initially, the individual was slightly hostile. You owe the money. Can you make a deal? Can you pay us it? I said, what do I owe? And he says, well, we sent you letters. You know what it is. I said, I haven't seen any letters. He says, you have a tax liability here, and he showed it to me. It was about $26,000.
Wow.
And as I mentioned before, because of that commodity thing. And I said, well, you're not sending me any letters on this. I haven't seen a thing. So he pulls up copies of the letters, and I look at them, and there it is, Robert A. Mathews, Jr., my Social Security number, and an address in Roanoke, North Carolina. I said, wow. Sir, I bought gas in Roanoke, but I've never lived there. You know, I don't have a place of business or anything in North Carolina. And he says, well, that's where we've been sending it. And it came to find out after about 6 weeks back and forth, that somebody had got a hold of my 2010 tax return before the IRS or at the IRS. I don't know where.
And that's supposed to be confidential.
They got the physical return. They just didn't get the information. It didn't end up at the IRS. Then they submitted their own with a Roanoke address and tried to get money back. And that's when they found out that I, quote, owed this $26,000. So they stopped it. But in the meantime, the IRS took the Roanoke address and was sending all the information to them. We still haven't straightened it out. And that's been, I was back in before October, late September when I worked with them. So we're 6 months out.
Wow. That's quite a story.
Yes, and you have no idea that it's happening. I mean, I was in total blindness for 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, and that thing I know from personal experience doesn't hit just people that have got a fairly substantial income. I know a lady that I went to church with for a while. I mean, just the stereotypical picture of your poor widow, lives on Social Security, barely makes ends meet, lives in a little old down single wide mobile home, drives a car that's 15 years old. She had her identity stolen, and thieves got her tax refund, just how small it was. So you don't have to be a bigwig to be the target of identity thieves, and the whole system is at fault that allows that to happen.
Well, it's crazy. I was reading the other day, the IRS was sending tax returns to the single address in Brooklyn. They were sent 2,700 tax returns to the same address.
Wow.
They've now made it a regulation that they can't send more than 12, I think it is, maybe 14 tax returns to any one address. How could they possibly be sending out 2,600 of these and nobody knows about it?
Right. If I were to challenge you to start with a clean piece of paper and devise a tax system that is more error-prone, more fraud-prone, invites more evasion than the current income tax, could you do it?
I don't think so, Bob. I just...
I agree.
It's crazy. It's insane. Doing the same thing and expecting different results. That's insanity, and that's what we have here.
And that's what our politicians want us to have. We should note that we have the tax code, exactly the tax code that the senators and congressmen in Washington want us to have. They've got control of it. They can make it say anything they want to, and look what they've given us.
Oh, it's nothing but the theft. I mean, some lobbyist walks into a representative's office with a briefcase and says, here's for your campaign donation, and by the way, we need this. And they go and carve some little hole in the thing. And then, of course, they have to balance it, so they add some more over here, somebody else, and they write in another 2 pages, and it goes on, and they never take one out. They never pull one down. It's amended and amended to where no one has any idea what's there.
And what somebody else gets, again, halfway across the country can affect you. And Ron and I were talking on an earlier program about the test that Money Magazine, testing supposedly the competence of tax preparers, and we found out that even the professionals just can't keep up with it all. So even if you hire the most competent attorney and tax accountant in town, you could still get messed up by something that neither you nor he knows about.
Absolutely. Going back to the South Jersey Regional Airport, we had a great white shoe accountant firm out of Philadelphia, and I talked to him, and I said, Melly, we're looking at FairTax. What's that going to do to your outfit? And he said, Bob, it's going to let me play a little more golf. He says, on the 8th floor, we have people up there that do nothing but study the tax code. They don't have clients. They simply study the tax code and feed the information back to the rest of us who do have clients. He says, and that goes on 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, all year long.
Yeah, and we've documented over the past 11 years, there have been thousands, literally thousands of changes to the tax code so that it averages out to be more than one per day for 11 years running.
Oh, yes. And there's no sign nothing's going to end this. And Obamacare has just made it even more absurd. Fortunately, we take the position that we hire retired military here, and they all have their medical taken care of. But I don't know how somebody on the outside that's hiring civilians that's going to cope up with this present change in the law.
It's going to keep on going until we, the people, rise up and demand better.
Well, I think we need to. And I think we're starting to get a little groundswell. I've talked to a lot of other businessmen and folks here on the airport. I've never found anybody in business who's against this.
And that is part one of my interview with Bob Mathews, owner of the National Parachute Testing Center in Denellen, Florida, talking about the economics of taxation as it relates to small business. And we'll have part two of that interview coming up in the next edition here of FairTax Power Radio. But wrap things up today, Ron, you got an interesting little thing from John Linder.
Yeah, John Linder, as you may know, was the original primary sponsor of the FairTax legislation when it was first submitted to Congress in 1999. He was a congressman from Georgia. He's since retired, and Rob Woodall won his seat. But John Linder is still very active in the fair tax, very much a proponent, and he wrote this article, which I found in Real Clear Markets online. When it comes to tax reform in the new Congress, Senator Orrin Hatch is in the catbird seat. As chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, he will drive the process in the Senate. In a recent article, he argues that the most important principles for reform were those followed by President Reagan nearly 30 years ago: economic growth, fairness, and simplicity. He makes a cogent argument for a plan that has been discussed and studied in Congress for 15 years. It's called the Fair Tax. In the last Congress, H.R. 25 had 75 sponsors, and in the House, and in the Senate, S. 122 had 8 sponsors in the Senate. Unfortunately, Senator Hatch was not one of them. And that's where I'm going to break from the article, because this shows us a problem. It demonstrates what happens in Washington. People talk a good game, but then they don't follow through.
Yeah, right? How many politicians do you hear now talking about, I'm in favor of tax reform? Some will even say, I want to get rid of the IRS, but very few of them will get into the specifics of how they really want to accomplish that.
Yeah, and that's why you need to nail them down on that, all right? So we have opened an office, a field office in Washington, and once a month, we're going to have some of our top people in the Americans for Fair Taxation go up there and talk to people, talk to senators and congressmen and their staffers and policy experts and so forth. Obviously, in order to fund something like that, it's going to take some bucks. Let's not be, tiptoe around it. We need some bucks to make sure this office operates properly and fully. Because they have been advised that if you're going to get this legislation through Congress, you need to be there on a regular basis. You need to talk to these people. You need to put your face in front of their face, okay? And that's going to take some funding to do that. So I encourage people to go to fairtax.org and join as a member, and become a member. And plus, while you're there, there's copious amounts of information. If you have any questions, there's 2 things you can do. You can look for the FAQs, frequently asked questions. You can also email us at thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. We'll be very happy to accept your questions and do our best to answer them. But funding is very important. We need members to show that that we have a lot of people, a lot of members, a lot of advocates. We need at least 1 million people. Secondly, we need your funding. So if you can help out, go to fairtax.org. Please do what you can to help us out. We would really appreciate it.
And if you one of these smartphone addicts like my daughter is, you can text the word member, MEMBER, to 68398. That's member to 68398 to join the fight and show your support for the fair tax.
Yep. So that will help get the ball rolling. I don't know what else I can say about how important it is. If you're listening to us for the first time and you're wondering what this fair tax program is about, first off, if you send us an email at thefairtaxguys@gmail.com, we can send you a link to our previous programs. Okay? So you can do that. Plus, there's just all kinds of information on fairtax.org. So please inform yourself.
Okay, and until next time, the fair tax. Once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Fair tax is coming, don't stand in the way. Fair tax is coming, 'cause the